Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of SAWO Vibe Check. This is a place where we check the vibe or the ecosystem's response to communities and other technical conversations that we have. Today, I have somebody really special. Somebody I followed for a while. He's a legend in developer space. And Phil, I'll tell you who he is, but he was so kind that this was the first time I was approaching him, and I asked him if he could probably come in and be a guest at our show. He graciously agreed, and not just that, right? We were just backstage, and he bestowed a lot of wisdom on us. He's a fantastic speaker. If you Google his talks, you'll see how hilarious, informational, and humble he is. And something that a glimpse of what you will probably see today in our session. And with no further delay, I welcome Phil Leggetter. Phil, I hope I'm saying your name right.
Perfect. And you need to give me a minute to cool down after that introduction. I'm a bit embarrassed. Thank you very much. Really pleased that you invited me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Phil is somebody I was just telling somebody else, and Phil knows that as well. I've looked Phil for a lot of thought leadership throughout the years since developer relations was growing through in India. His talks has been something that has been of a guiding light for me and my team and other people that I usually refer Phil's resources to. And thank you, Phil, for doing what you do and just inspiring people unknowingly. I don't think you imagined, right? Like there are people here and back in India listening to you and following you the way that we do.
No, I mean, it's the fantastic thing about the internet and the ability to put things out there, and you never know who's going to read it and what that's going to result in. So I'm really pleased that you found it beneficial, and other people have too, and I'll try and continue to do that. And I mean, so many people have put in so many great things online for free, so we're all very fortunate to be part of that ecosystem.
Excellent. Phil, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you land up here? Your previous background history, and maybe what do you do right now?
Sure. So, I mean, my background is, I live in Scotland, I should say. So, hello from Scotland. And I've worked remotely for now 11 years or so. Before that, in fact, that's when I started developer relations around 11 years ago. It coincided with working remotely. But before that, I did software engineering for 10 years. Interestingly enough, JavaScript. I didn't think, at one point, I didn't think anything was going to happen with JavaScript. So I started doing a bit of Java and a bit of .NET. How wrong was I? JavaScript obviously exploded. And then, after that kind of 10 years, I felt a bit stifled in an engineering role. So I enjoyed learning, creating, and sharing, and that's how I came across Christian Hellman, his Developer Evangelist Handbook. And I'd been to a Microsoft event in Barcelona. I think it was called TechEd, and Microsoft had evangelists, and that kind of that and Christian Hellman introduced me this idea of developer evangelism, which has, grown into. There's still people in developer evangelist roles, but certainly developer relations as the umbrella term now. And then, so my first job was at a company called Pusher, evangelizing the real-time web. And then I helped a company, actually a company that I've worked for 4 times called Capitalist Systems. I helped them open source something called Blade Runner JS. Fantastic name. Product was just not quite right. Unfortunately, it got some interest, but never got a lot of traction. And then I ended up at a company called Nexmo, and we offered communications APIs, and within 3 months we were acquired, and that was just an opportunity to demonstrate the value of developer relations within an organization, and we grew the team to 42 people. We'll maybe go into that a little bit more later. Very multifunctional team, but a lot of developer relations roles in there. And then after 4.5 years at Vonage, I decided to move back into to get a bit closer to the technology again, and joined a startup called tru.ID. And we're in the mobile authentication space. We offer APIs and SDKs that allow you to authenticate using the mobile carrier authentication you're already using on your phone. So that's where we are now, and that's what we're doing. And yeah, it's exciting to be at a startup again.
Excellent. Fantastic, right? Like extreme wide variety of experiences that you have. I noticed that you've worked with different companies, and I'm assuming not all of them would be from Scotland, right? They probably differ on. They probably differed in sizes and areas too.
I've worked for one company in Scotland since 2001 when I started. I actually ended up in London after graduating from university in Scotland because I couldn't find a job in tech. That's very different now. That's very, very different now. Scotland's got a really good technology scene. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I think all of the companies have had a UK entity. So I've always worked for a UK entity, but a few of them have been incorporated in other places. But yeah, the location of the organization. I mean, obviously, I'm fortunate. I'm from the UK. I don't have the same barriers to employment that some people have. But yeah, I mean, the location of the organization that I've been working for has never really been a problem. The only thing I've thought about is how do I get paid? Do I get paid in the native currency or Great British pounds? So that's been the only thing. Yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been a great opportunity to try out loads of different things at loads of different organizations.
Excellent. So has this have your learnings differed based on region or like whichever company you were working with? The developer journey experience and the learnings that you've had, your approach towards developer relations, the people who were listening to you. Did you have to change your strategy? Did you have to work around on a lot of frameworks if you were working from different regions, or like was the learning standard throughout?
So I mean, one of the things I didn't mention is I've created something called the ARP framework, AAA, RRRP, and the idea of that is to a lot of people, take on a developer relations role and think, well, we'll create a Slack group, a Slack workspace, or we'll get Discord set up, and we'll do some hackathons, and I'm simplifying it. But there is a kind of go-to set of things that you do when you create developer relations team, or you want to hire your first developer relations professional. And actually, in 2016, when I was looking for my next role, I had lots of conversations with companies. I'd actually published the ARP framework, defining developer relations as a blog post, a gimmicky thing, which is the Devrelometer, which is, are you doing evangelism or advocacy?
That's how I found you. I think I went to stumbled on the framework.
So actually, there's someone called Adam Devander who was my editor at Programmable Web for a while. I did some authoring there. He's got a book coming out. There's no such thing as developer marketing. He's been very pro the Devrelometer. He got me to register the domain to devrelometer.com. So he's really into that. You've made me lose where I was going. What were we talking about? You've got to remember I'm old, so my memory.
Yeah.
My memory
So
goes
you
as
said
well.
you've developed the framework, and that's
Right.
how you were telling me about the region-wise learnings. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So the point of that was during these conversations, trying to find a new role, it felt like consultancy, because a lot of companies are hiring people. They think they need developer relations. They probably do, but they're not sure why they're hiring. So you're having a lot of conversations like, well, what do you need from developer relations? Why do you think you need developer relations? So then ultimately it maps back to goals. Well, what goals does the company have? So the ART framework is awareness, acquisition, activation. I can never remember the R's. Referral, retention, revenue, and product, right? So product feedback. Which of these are the goals you have for developer relations? Now, sometimes everyone says everything, but you have to narrow in on 1, 2, 3, depending on how many people you're willing to hire. So it very much differs. Each company, it differs what their goals are. I mean, regionally, that can also very much be the case, because it could. So a good example is, for instance, Stripe. You think everybody knows of Stripe, but there are countries where people haven't heard as much of Stripe. So Stripe's goals for developer relations, actually Stripe's goals for developer relations are purely product, and they let the product do their marketing for them. But say they were more traditional, like a lot of other companies, it's okay. There's a product feedback goal, but there's also an awareness goal at the two sides of up. It could be that Stripe kind of go, well, actually, in this particular region at the minute, it's purely awareness for us right now. So the developer relations activities you would have at the same company in a different region would be different. So that's the thing. And then with ARP, the idea is that each of those goals has a set of activities that will help you, can align with one or more of the goals. So then you can work out which activities I should be undertaking as as a developer, the lead developer relations person or the team defining that developer relations strategy. So yeah, I mean, with everything, with many of these questions, it depends, but it's interesting how it varies, what the inputs and outputs can be depending on the situation that company's in, the type of product they've got, the age of that company, their brand. For instance, imagine when we renamed from Nexmo to Vonage. You've got a legacy Vonage brand, which is known for enabling cheap phone calls over the internet, over VoIP. Now wants to be seen as a communications API platform. There's a lot. Then you're going straight back to awareness again and trying to change awareness of the understanding of what that brand means to a lot of people. So just a change in time, a change of a goal for an organization can completely change your developer relations activities and your strategy.
Fair enough, right? So this is something that I haven't had the luxury to experience as of yet. So it's pretty interesting to see that it changes from industry to industry and region to region, and rightly so. I would imagine that would be the case. So this is your first time working with an Auth ecosystem, right? Before this, prior to this, you worked with Nexmo, other companies. But you want to tell us a little bit about what has the Auth system look like there, and how do you see that progressing? What are the different methodologies that you've seen progressing, and how's that trending out?
So I'm going to give another pitch for another developer relations product. So I'm also reviewing. So we've mentioned Adam Devander and his there's no such thing as developer marketing. So a lady called Karen Luco and someone called James Parton are writing Devrel, so the Devrel book. I think if you search for the Devrel book, you'll find it. But in there, they have it's a book about helping you define your developer relations strategy. But they talk about segmentation, and I think that's like fundamentally important. You've got to understand the audience you're trying to reach, and their needs. So when you so at Pusher was a generic WebSocket service catching the wave of WebSocket at the time. It was still kind of it hadn't hit an official like RFC, or it wasn't officially adopted by all browsers. But people were like, "Oh, well, this technology is cool. Oh, you can build these real-time things with it." And so Pusher caught this wave, and it was generically available. No matter what you were building, no matter your use case, no matter whether you're in finance or healthcare or tinkering on a side project, that technology was usable. So it was all developers, right? I genuinely think all developers are interested in that. That's a great place to be. At my next place, I worked on this thing, Blade Runner JS. It was helping web developers, so single page applications, HTML5 at the time, which is still a thing, but just not mentioned anymore. Helping them build very complex JavaScript applications, front-end applications with thousands and thousands of lines of JavaScript, loads of other assets, loads of people contributing. So, I mean, TypeScript is a great example of a solution to that. It stops you making errors within JavaScript. So we used to write JavaScript and pretend there were such things as interfaces and classes before class existed and things like that. So anyway, so there's, but then who really benefits from that? It's developers that are building very complex front-end applications. And at the time, it was enterprises. So for that company, we could go wide and we could talk about so I spoke at Future.js on this, and I remember one of the people involved in building React.js at Facebook tweeted, it's one of my highlighting moments, "This is legit," because they'd seen that this was a problem at Facebook. They're building very complex, reasonably complex HTML5 applications, and it was a real problem. But normally it's at enterprises. So it was like, okay, we should be targeting enterprise developers. So that was there. Then I went to Nexmo, and it was communications APIs, send and receive text messages, make and receive phone calls, verify phone numbers using SMS and voice, which we all know is legacy now, but still has a use case. So it was like, well, everybody needs this. So our strategy was, well, let's reach all developers. In the Auth, so I'll get to it now. So the Auth space, it's who is the target audience. Now again, for tru.ID, we have a product called SIM-check, and you can say whether or not a phone number has changed recently. The SIM card associated with the phone number has changed recently. So that's usable by everybody. but it's very narrow. How many people really have the need for that, and also the timeline. How long do they spend using that? Like it's one API call and you're done. But the interesting product is the mobile SDKs with using this carrier authentication mechanism. But again, it's mobile developers, so it's Android, iOS. Who's passionate about authentication? I mean, people that care about security. Obviously you would hope every developer, but if we're honest, it's not every developer. Every developer should be aware of it, but not everybody cares about it and be passionate about it and wants to be involved. Yes, they'll use it. So you've got to make sure the developer experience is great for everybody. But if talking about community and raising awareness and so on, you've got to be segmenting based on people that care about authentication. So it's very narrow, right? We're both working in quite a narrow, widely applicable, solves real problems, right? You cannot downplay the importance of security, authentication, verification, but it's a much narrower audience than every web developer, or I mean, no, even when you slice it, every mobile developer, it brings it down from every developer, obviously. So I just think it's a certain segment of the developer audience that you need to have. And then we spoke about this a little bit behind the scenes. It's what are, as similar companies, similar sizes, what are our goals for community? What does community mean for us within authentication as a subsection, our own community? Should we be thinking of the broader authentication community and engaging in that community, or creating our own? Probably a little bit of both, but then the number of people that out in the broader communities that are interested in and excited and understand the true value of authentication is much broader than the sort of community that we will ultimately create. It's going to be much smaller naturally. So I don't know if I answered your question. I just kind of went off on
Yeah. No, that makes sense, right? And there's a difference, right? You can either work with developers in a broader space. If you were to work in Java, people with Java skills, you definitely have a larger base. But the question is, with Auth, is that you're working with somebody who is definitely solving a need, even though it's narrowed down, the numbers are lesser. But it's usually the same, right? Like when JavaScript probably started out, not everybody kind of jumped was on the bandwagon right from the beginning. But and that's what I have a feeling that with Auth as well, it's such an important skill to know and kind of develop if you're a product manager or a founder, that you will need to kind of solve this, right? If you're going to build an enterprise solution or even like a big solution that it's supposed to scale. And that's why working in development space in Auth makes sense for me, because this place will kind of broaden up, right? And and I want to know that so because we both work with Devrel space in Auth, where do you see like Devrel helping Auth companies and vice versa? Like obviously developers are helping Auth and Auth helping developers, right? And how do you see that is going?
I mean, I've always, interesting enough with ARP, P was at the end of it, product. I do think that it should be more of a flywheel. It should feed in. And actually, I mentioned Stripe earlier in their kind of product first approach. I do think it's super important that again, developer relations teams can be structured in many different ways. My responsibility is developer experience, really, and within that, there's developer relation. Well, it's tricky. You could say developer relations is the top line thing, and then there's experience, education, success, various other things. But my focus for the past, I've been working at tru.ID since May. In fact, it will nearly be a year on the 25th. Focus first was to get API standards right, was to get documentation right, was to get code samples right. Get that product right first, I think is always the case. Probably in the authentication space, I mean, you might have seen it, it might be enterprises that are more interested in this technology first. So we do have a sales team. I think you need to get that product right there. So product feedback, product development, potentially, the product manager could be within developer relations, developer experience. So that's obviously super important. But then there's education. I mean, I think what both of our companies are doing is something new. So I'm reasonably confident now that if a developer is asked to add two-factor authentication to their application, the majority will have heard that SMS and voice isn't super secure, but would probably still go, well, it's a second factor. That's fine. So, but I think, our part of our jobs is to then educate developers that isn't the best option. There are better options that are more secure, provide better experiences, and so on. So I think then that jumps around to the awareness, and that doesn't have to be shoving your product down people's throats. That has to just be, here are the options for authentication. Here are the pros and cons of each of them. Yes, I work for a company. I don't work for MongoDB. I work for tru.ID, and we offer this version. We offer this functionality that the carriers offer, but we aggregate it and offer it around the world. So if you're interested in this number verify idea rather than 2FA by SMS or voice, then we're a product you could look at. And we're fortunate enough that we're the only people you can sign up for self-service and use it too. So there's a bit of value there. So yeah,
makes sense, right? This is extremely crucial. This is something that we do as well. We hold something called product roundtables, where we invite developers who have worked with our product and kind of get their feedback and work on it. Furthermore, we are trying to keep our product roadmap open so that they know, not just like their feedback is not just heard and it's also acted upon. One go-to catchphrase that we use is that your feedback is gold for us, because they don't know how crucial it is for not just like building the product but also scaling it and even changing the messaging if we have to, right?
Yeah.
Extremely crucial that way. Okay, so have you noticed, and this is interesting, right? That because I keep advocating the importance of communities and developer relations team, but in maybe like quickly in 1, 2, 3 points, have you noticed like the downsides of not having a community or a dev team, especially with dev tools or companies like that?
If a company isn't developer centric, so there are some companies that are developer centric. Algolia being a good example. Founded, I believe. Let's be more generic. Companies that are founded by software engineer, Twilio. Okay, Twilio, founded by Jeff Lawson, developer, right? Understands the value of developers. Interesting enough, they also understand the value of the developer relations team, and they were, one of the first people to do that. But they fundamentally understand the developer. So I think they could build good products for developers without a developer relations team. Now, the Twilio team may hate me for saying that, because I'm sure they bring in valuable feedback. But I think if a company fundamentally understands a developer, they will build okay products. If it's a more, I don't know, traditional, old school, I don't want to be too negative, but a company where the founders aren't developers and therefore don't have empathy for developers and therefore won't pass that through the organization, then the developer relation team can be your voice of the external, that's advocacy, right? That's the conversation out, bring it back in, be that voice of the developer. I think that's the real value there. And again, if you have products for developers, the best way to reach them, absolutely the best way to reach them, is with people in developer relations, because you're talking to their own people, right?
Yeah, fair enough. So you've obviously set up a few teams, right? Tell me more about how you structure a team and how does their like average day-to-day work look like? A little bit about that.
So I think it will differ depending on the size of the company's needs and the size of the team. At a smaller team, I advocate for hiring, especially if it's like an API first product. You can have something like Slack, which has APIs, but that's not the main focus. The main focus is building a software as a service application. But if it's an API first company, I would certainly hire a generic developer advocate, and they will get involved in loads of things, probably do a lot of things that don't scale. As you grow, you're naturally going to specialize. So, I'll talk about specifics. At Nexmo, we knew that the products were generically useful to everybody, so we hired advocates for each of the programming languages. We then specialized. As we hired those advocates to represent those communities and have those conversations, we brought in a community manager. As we grew even further, because we were responsible for building the SDKs, documentation, and so on. We created a developer experience team, which focused on SDKs, documentation, API standards. We had a developer education team, which focused on blog content. So, I mean, Vonage Dev, learn.vonage.com, the YouTube channel, and so on. And the community team became two things. One, to support all of those teams' engagement in, well, three things actually. One, to support engagement of those teams within their communities. Two, to run some of their own programs, Vonage Voyages as an example, which was our kind of champions program. And then three, actually four, three was to hire people, going back to generalization again, interestingly enough, when we had that need to hire people in certain locations, because, you know, technology, communities do live in certain locations. San Francisco is a good example, London, Paris, you know, Mumbai, places that are technology hubs, hiring individuals in these locations. So we've got a person that represents our brand there. That was really important. The fourth one, which is very interesting, was actually to encourage a culture of innovation and togetherness within Vonage as an organization. We ran something called One Hack. We gave presentations around various offices. So that was very unique to Vonage, I think. I don't think a developer relations team should necessarily be responsible for changing a company's culture.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, the way I'm structuring my team is we have three functions. We have developer experience, developer marketing, and there's community management. Now, I know
Right.
you mentioned that there's no such thing as developer marketing, but it's an umbrella term necessarily to use that, you know, how we put out the content and how this.
I think within Adam's first chapter, he says he's lying. So just to give it away, I think he's doing marketing in his phrase. So yeah. So yeah.
All right. So the developer experience is how people consume the product SDK, API documentations. Marketing is how we reach out to developers and how they reach out to us. And community management is, you know, the glue that holds everything together. The idea is to build all these verticals and have like everybody leading it as a head program manager, and they run their own programs as such. It's
Perfect.
an yeah. It's like seems like
Yeah.
a whole surface like that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned glue, the community. I totally agree with that, because the way that we had it was we actually had community cross-cutting to show
Yeah.
the role of that was, I mean, not just the services team, but part of the thing that they did was to, as you say, glue the other teams together.
Exactly, because you know you will have to reach out to communities no matter which function you're in. That's the goal.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so talking of communities, what do you think with the whole pandemic and we're all working remote? What is the future? And also, since there is no limitation of location anymore, where does that lead us? Where will communities grow from here on? What do you think?
So, I mean, again, we spoke about this briefly beforehand, but I mean, my question there is always, what does community mean? You know, and I guess if we're talking about business, which I kind of guess we are, you know, we're employed to work and build communities and support communities. It's important to identify what those communities really mean. You know, the orbit model by Orbit is a really good one. And it's a good example. It has this idea of it's gravity with orbits, and you have the external orbit is kind of, I can't remember the levels. I should look this up. Just kind of watches, people that are aware of your brand, through to internally advocates. So you've got people that are, you know, product users and are actively engaging within, well, with your company, with your brand. It's up to your definition of what a community is. You know, are those people on that outer orbit really part of your community? Again, that's up to you to decide. So I've always found community to be a really interesting thing. You know, it's like at Vonage Nexmo, did we have a community? Yes, we had a Slack workspace with 2,000-3,000 people in there. How many were active? Just because they've got an account, are they a community? I don't know. You know, you could @channel and spam people, but you know, you don't really want to be doing that. So I always think that's a really tricky one. The value of community is a lot of the things that developer relations is trying to do, right? But interesting enough, the how is the difference. Certainly from the marketing side, the how is the different thing. So within marketing, traditional marketing, it's, again, Orbit talk about this, it's very push. It's advertising, it's, you know, raising awareness, it's trying to push people through. I'm doing that, but I mean, trying to push people through. Was it pull? Can't remember. But it's very kind of like active, not aggressive, but a lesser style of, a lesser word than aggressive. Developer relations is not in any way aggressive. It's about supporting and enable communities, being part of those communities, and letting serendipity play its, you know, be the moments that you look out for, right? You build connections. You can be entrepreneurial and you can look for opportunities, but a lot of the time it's just the fact that someone's seen you, like giving a talk, or you've shared something on the internet, that brings value to the business. So I think, especially if you want to reach developers, that's how you have to do it. So community is the how. It's how you do developer relations. So, I mean, the future of any company that wants to interact with developers and have developers as users, it's fundamental. Community is just fundamental to their approach to building a product, to raising, you know, all the things in up. Location wise, I mean, there's still the time zone problem. I mean, it's getting into your evening, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that's always going to be a barrier, and therefore you're going to have trouble building synchronous communities, but not asynchronous. So I think there'll be a difference there. So, you know, the platforms that better support those distributed communities will be asynchronous. So, you know, things like Discord and Slack, I still think they lead themselves towards much better for synchronous communication. So there's still a space for, you know, but the way that their UI is structured, basically the UX. So there's still a space for supporting larger global communities in the same place, in the same digital place, in an asynchronous way.
Yeah, makes sense. And a very interesting question that you asked, like, what is community? So every time I try and answer a question, I see if my 70-year-old parents can understand it. Because if they can, I'm sure everybody can, right? So I try and explain communities in a way which is agnostic of the industry that I'm working in. And the way I see it is that even if somebody's never been to school or had like formal education, they're still a part of the community, right? What that community is basically what they really believe in, right? It's basically a shared identity. If you were to ask somebody, hey, which community do you belong to? They'd probably say, hey, I'm Brazilian, or maybe I'm a Christian, or they'd probably say some facet of their life which they truly resonate with, right? Like that's like the core part of their identity. The minute your identity kind of exceeds or like transcends into a shared identity that other people also hold on to, I feel like you've become a part of the community, right? And that's what I'm looking at here is the way I see community is that there must be like a greater why or values that you believe in, and the stronger you believe in it is the more closer you are to the community. Kind of brings back to the orbit model that you said, right?
Yeah.
Because why rights is in the center. And like you said, I think the obviously challenges of time zone and everything will be there, but a lot of things that would happen locally initially, like you would have like a festival or like an event in a certain location, that has gone away. So people will now have all the more motivation to kind of relate to and be part of the communities that are just aligns with their values even more and even stronger. That's where I think is going. Let's see.
Yeah.
It's an unpredictable world.
It's interesting because part of that I was thinking you could be part of community and you're not really aware you are.
Yeah, that's true. And if you ask deeper, right, like everybody is, it's just like a matter of realization.
Yeah.
I think we have a few questions. We'll take those, and I think we will probably end up with your last words with the developers that any developers that we have, right? And I'll take Siddharth, if we can maybe pin the questions. Okay. So Akash asks, can you guys share the framework and implementation methodology? If Akash is mentioning, or if you're referring to the orbit model or the ARP, I definitely have that bookmarked. I'll just copy it. I'll just drop that in the comments.
It's a terrible acronym. I've thought about calling it BARP, so it's brand, but that's even worse. So no, we'll have to stick to ARP for now.
Sure. No, we'll definitely share that in the comments. All this is recorded, and everywhere you're seeing this, you'll have the comments and everything pinned in. And that's that. Putting orbit model. So that if you could also put in Phil's up, I can just hold that up for you. And in the meantime, if you can, if we have any more questions, okay. Ayushi asked, "What are three pillars of development? What are these according to you, Phil?"
It's tricky because different people interpret things in different ways. So with the book that I mentioned, the Devrel book, they don't actually have it as three pillars. I don't think. I think there's community, which it's like a tree. They've called it the Devrel Tree. So this isn't my interpretation necessarily, although it doesn't misalign. There's a tree, the roots. As we mentioned, the underpinnings is the community. They have developer experience. So, as you say, the touch points of the developer on the platform, API standards, SDKs, documentation, all that sort of thing. They have developer marketing. So, content creation, supporting events. I mean, for me, it's supporting communities, engaging within communities, probably, in combination with the community team. And they have developer success. And that's an interesting one for me because some companies, a developer advocate might actually go and work with customers and help them with integration. Is that also support? Maybe that's community support. Maybe that's GitHub answers and things like that. So that's an interest. So that's the one that's the most front of mind to me at the moment. And that could be partnerships as well in developer success, integrations and things like that. So those are the three pillars that I've seen most recently. Interestingly enough, as I said, community were the roots rather than a pillar itself.
Makes sense. Yeah. Also, what should we keep in our bags for sure? Sorry.
It
Bunch of
depends if we're
swags, I
back,
guess.
Yeah, it depends if we're back on the road again, doesn't it? If you're back on the road, then I mean the conversations about but there's actually there's a Devrel Collective community, which if you search for Devrel Collective, you'll find it. It's a Slack group. You need to apply. Say you're working in developer relations or interested in getting into developer relations to get into it. And there's actually a GitHub repo there where people have listed just the bags themselves and the pros and cons of the different bags, let alone what goes in them. So there's loads of different bag choices. You've obviously got to have your laptop. You've got to have, if you can, a backup, but that's going to be heavy. You need a power brick. You need a presenter. You need various different adapters. You need an Ethernet cable. And that's to do your job, right? And then if you want to reward people in the community, then you've got to try and get some t-shirts, some stickers, other parts of swag in there as well. So I always have, embarrassingly, I try and get everywhere with just my rucksack. So I also have a change of clothes in the bottom and my toiletries. So depends where you're going.
Awesome. Next question is: the evolution struck Auth industry pretty recently. How do you think Devrel can help scale any company in the sector? So I think when Ayushi says pretty recently, it may not necessarily be true for throughout the world, but definitely for India and definitely some parts of the world, right? So what do you think? How is developer relations helping Auth industry? I think we touched upon this basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be really interested in finding out, what's happened in India specifically around this, but maybe that's for a separate conversation. I mean, I do think it's the awareness side right now. We obviously know you need to help build great products and facilitate those conversations as you're doing, in your roundtables. But I think it's just raising awareness to make sure people are making educated choices when they're thinking about their authentication solution.
Yeah, makes sense. Fair enough. I think. Okay, last question, I guess. What are the basic skills to get started with Devrel? Phil, I would want you to take this because I think you've been in the space for 20 years now, and I would feel really small to say anything here.
No, not at all. I mean, everyone's got unique experiences because actually the answer is it depends because every company needs different things from developer relations. Again, the Auth framework. What are the goals for each of those things? There's different needs. if it's more, so I think one of the things is, I don't like the phrase, but technical or non-technical, because that's not. And actually on opensource.com, someone wrote a really good blog post about why you shouldn't say non-technical, because so a community manager sometimes doesn't code, but the job that they do is highly technical. They also need to be able to communicate about the products that they're representing, and the products that they're also helping get feedback on, and work with people within the community who understand how to articulate and communicate about those products. So I think it depends on the organization. If it's a developer advocacy role or a coding role, then the things that I look for when people are applying for roles are, I mean, it's the CV well written, because that's the first impression you get. And whether that's right or not, I don't know. But you get the CV. But what details do I look for on there? I look for the GitHub link or GitLab link. I look for a blog post. A blog. So see where that content is, and I look for links to talks. I also try and find somewhere in there around community involvement. So what has this person been doing to demonstrate that they care about communities? And I mentioned earlier in our pre-chat that a lot of the people that we hired at Nexmo got their first jobs in developer relations. But the reason they got hired is because they could demonstrate that they cared about communities, they were involved in communities, and they had some of those fundamental skills. For an advocate, they could write code. They could also write a blog post to show how the code worked, that sort of thing. So I think it's those sorts of skills, but it will differ depending on the role that you're going for. And there's that specialization, developer experience, developer education, or developer marketing, as you said, developer success. There's all these different things. So, and education goes in developer marketing, by the way, in the pillars.
Yeah, definitely. That's an important one. All right. I don't think we have any more questions. So, Phil, if we could wrap up with your final words to all the developers who are listening to you. Go ahead. All yours.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not aware of your audience, so with that last question, if it's people that are interested in getting involved, I mean, I guess it's either authentication. I mean, if it's authentication, please check out SAWO Labs and tru.ID and look at the future of authentication. That's important. If it's getting into developer relations, I think that last question was a really important one. It's if you're interested in getting in developer relations, the how is community, right? You should be involved you should care about community naturally. It's got to be a passion, a drive to want to support and enable communities. And that is, communities that are external, that are your potential customers, but maybe not. And that shouldn't matter too much. It obviously will affect whether or not you'll significantly fund those communities and so on, sponsor them, but support and enable those communities, and then support and enable your customers. And then the specific skills depends on the sort of role you're going for. If it's developer experience, for me, it would be, API standards, SDKs. It goes more towards the engineering side with also a product mindset. What makes for a good product? If it's developer advocacy, the product's still important, but then it moves a bit more towards the marketing side of things. If it's community, I've got to say the best community managers that I know are just highly organized and sometimes really good at the marketing side of things as well. But sometimes just being highly organized and caring about community can be a great way of getting into community management. There's nothing better than everybody knowing exactly what for instance, you setting this up today, Sid, who's behind the scenes, obviously getting some credit in the comments, but we knew we were coming here, we knew what we were doing. There's lots of value in that, because then people can focus on the community activities and not being disorganized. So that's really valuable in community roles. Ta-da!
Wow, excellent. Phil, thanks so much. And sorry, I think we're having a little bit of technical issues right now.
A bit of a delay, yeah.
Yeah, so I think should be stable now. Phil, thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. Super insightful, and I can't be more grateful for kind of accepting this invite right in the first go. Um, Thanks so much. You like I said before, you don't know how many people you're inspiring just by the virtue of being here. Thanks so much, and I think we a lot of developers may reach out to you. If we put your LinkedIn and sorry your Twitter profile right under it, and thank you so much for being here. And I hope you have a great career and keep sharing great insights with us.
Thanks so much, Cherish. Really appreciate it, and thanks to Sid behind the scenes as well. It was great to meet you both, and great to be part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks Sid for managing everything else, right from the promotional material and kind of running the entire show. Thanks so much. Take care. Thanks. Bye bye.